Hey, Stewart's Chapel. This is Brother Don Pierson and Don Counts, and this is Tuesday's devotion, and we're at Thumper and Allie Pig's home, and I'm going through Scripture and connecting it to some of my life stories, some of the most meaningful stories. This one impacted my life in relationship to prayer probably more than any other event in my life in relationship to prayer. I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 7, towards the last chapter of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 7, verse 7 through 12. Let's read the scripture. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be open. What man is there among you who, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Ask, seek, and knock. Jesus is teaching on prayer. I was preparing for a conference when I worked for the Tennessee Baptist Convention. I was thinking on this. The subject that I had been assigned was about the intensity of prayer. You see, most often when we look at this section of Scripture, it's usually dealt with in books and teachings on three different kinds of praying. I want to share with you a story, and then I will share with you what I believe this Scripture is all about. As I said, I was thinking about this, and I was preparing, and it had been on my mind, and I was at my son's home. I will lay out the room. We were all in their living room. There was a Packer game on, Green Bay Packer game was on the TV, and my son's a big football fan. He was on the end of the couch directly in front of the TV. I was to his left, sitting in a recliner. Directly across from me was my wife in another chair. And then to my wife's left, on the same couch that my son was on, was my daughter-in-law, and she was laid out with her feet kind of on my son's lap, and I'm back in the recliner. I've had a long day. Mindy's had a long day. We've all had a long day, and we're just visiting. On the floor is a blanket, and on that floor was one of my granddaughters, Abby. She was just a toddler then. She was, not even a toddler. She was crawling then. She was not even standing up at that point. She's down on the blanket at my wife's feet playing. The truth is, my son is deeply into the TV. I'm just trying to rest. My wife's attention and my daughter-in-law's attention are on each other, but be honest with you, they're very mindful of Abby. Now, the other granddaughter, the older granddaughter, is off in a room playing, and that was Sydney. Everything is going on pretty well, and my son's yelling at the TV, and my daughter-in-law and my wife are talking, and Abby is on the floor playing. All of a sudden, Abby leaves the feet of my wife. She begins to crawl in my direction. I see her. She looks up at me, and immediately I lower the recliner, and she's right there at my feet, and I pick her up, and she's laughing. I'm holding her. I'm loving on my granddaughter, and she's comfortable for a moment. But then she's had all she wants, and it's obvious she wants down. So I put her back down on the blanket, and she goes back to playing. Not long after that, I'm back in the chair, up my feet up again, and I'm very relaxed. And all of a sudden, she leaves the feet of my wife, and again, she starts to crawl over to me. She looks up at me and pulls her attention on me. I lower the recliner and put my feet on the chair, but I don't pick her up this time. She comes over and she begins to pull on my pant leg, and of course, I reach down and I pick her up and I love on her, and she stays in my hands for a while, and then she's ready to be put back on the floor, and I put her back on the floor and she goes back to playing. So twice now. One time she crawled and looked in my direction. She didn't have to touch me or anything. I put my feet down. I picked her up. I loved on her. The second time she does the same thing, but this time she comes. I let her pull on my pant leg for a little bit to let me know that she wants me. I pick her up. I love on her. Put her back down. Some time goes by, and then all of a sudden she does it again. I lower the recliner. I have my feet down. She's at my feet. I don't pick her up. She's pulling on my pants, and I don't pick her up again. She begins to whine, cry, like, "Why aren't you picking me up?" She begins to pull herself up. Now, at this moment, she's still crying a little bit, and I still haven't picked her up. My wife is looking at me, my daughter-in-law is looking at me, and they're both thinking, "You are the worst grandpa around. Why don't you pick her up?" My son has also noticed because she's starting to get loud. And then all of a sudden she does it. She takes her hands off of my leg and she holds her hands up and she is standing. When she does that, I immediately grab her and embrace her. I hold her, and she falls to sleep in my arms. As I reflected on that, almost immediately, I knew that God was helping me to understand this verse. Now, I'm not saying that this section of Scripture is not about three kinds of prayer, but I do believe that it's definitely about three types of intensity in prayer. You see, the prayer of the desire of my granddaughter, each of those three times was for me. In other words, the prayer hasn't changed. The first time, she just had a look at me and she's all mine. And in most cases, that's the way it is. You know, most of the teaching on prayer is on asking. Most of the teaching and most of the calling for us to pray is on asking. And God is there. Most of the time, all we got to do is look towards Him and He's all there. But then there's the seeking. And the seeking, usually in the Old Testament, He says, "Seek my face." And the reason was because there were so many faces in the room. There were their military, their king, their possessions, other rulers. But God says, "I want you to turn your face against everything." Well, in that room, there was my wife, my daughter-in-law, my son. In other words, in that room, Abby had several people she could choose from, several faces. She chose mine. She went to a different level of praying. Her desire was the same. She wanted me, but now she has come to my feet and she's pulling, she's tugging, she is seeking only me. And I honored that. The third time, knocking prayers are the most intense prayers in Scripture. You're still asking, you're still seeking, but the intensity goes up. They usually include fasting or crying out. There's more intensity. At that moment, it is obvious to you and to all around that you really only want one thing. And that's what happened with Abby. She could have stopped. She could have left. She could have crawled away. She could have gone to one of those, but she kept staying and she kept begging and pleading until she stood and she rested in my arms. Most of the teaching on prayer are asking and seeking, but most of the prayers that are recorded in Scripture are the prayers of crying out or knocking. They express our hunger, the depth of our desire. When was the last time you camped out at the feet of Jesus? Let Him hear your cry. Pull on His pant leg. Make it clear that you're not going anywhere until He responds, that you knocked until He answered. Love you, Stewart's Chapel.